All right. Andy, I
Billy Ray.
I have to known by many names, but I have to start the interview by telling you how much I appreciate you sitting down to be interviewed by someone else. I know that this is your podcast, and you and Nikki have done a great job interviewing tons of people, and they're great people and great stories that are told. The number one issue that I hear from people about the podcast that you guys put together is that people want someone to interview you. They want to hear about your story. And to give the audience a little bit of background, Andy Mill, in the sport of fishing in the Keys, is someone that, for me, when I first moved to the Keys, his level of competition and the output of winning that you were doing with a lot of different people in the tournament scene, it was a lot of things, but for me, moving down here, it was inspiring to watch. Everybody that knows you thinks you're a great guy. And everyone that I've talked to in the process of preparing these questions and getting your story together, and I've done a lot of work, I've talked to a bunch of the guides you fished with, everyone says how excited they are to hear you tell your story about what happened down here and the effect that you had on the fishing down here. So thanks for allowing me to interview you after you interviewed me. And this interview is about you and your story, and not just the effect that you had on the fishery down here, but the effect that you've had on the people down here. So That's the introduction, and I'm really...
So that's it?
This is it. Over? That's it, Andy. You're off the hook.
Thank you.
Oh, wait. No, I have 18 pages of questions to ask you. So let's start early on. You were born in 1953. Where were you born?
Laramie, Wyoming.
And what was your sort of childhood like?
Excuse me. I was born in Fort Collins, Colorado. And then we grew up in Laramie for about 7 years before, or 6 years before we moved to Aspen. But I was born in Colorado.
And did you grow up fishing? Were you from an outdoors family?
You know, we didn't fish, maybe a little bit in Medicine Bow outside of Laramie, Wyoming. You know, I vaguely remember the most prevalent memories I have is once that we got into Aspen, and that's when I started, getting involved with fly fishing. But when I was a little kid, there's a couple photographs of me with a fish, but I don't remember that very much. It was not very impactful.
Was that fly fishing or
no? That was just fishing with my dad.
Okay.
Me fishing up.
And so, in your teenage years into your 20s, that's when you got into skiing. And for those of you that don't know, Andy was a competitive ski racer for a very long time. But did you fish before that?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate because growing up in Aspen, I was about 8 years old. Played a lot of baseball at the time, and I remember going across near Wagner Park in downtown Aspen, and I saw this fly line horizontally being thrown back and forth. And it was like this big gravitational pull. And it was the great Ernie Schwiebert in town giving a clinic for Phil Wright, who owned the country store. So Ernie Schwiebert, when I got over there, long story short, he taught me how to move this rod and throw this line. And many years later, he and I went to Alaska together. He used to come into Aspen, sleep on my couch, and then we would go up on the frying pan, and we had this relationship. And anybody who knows who Ernie Schwiebert is, he's one of the great entomologists. He wrote Matching the Hatch. He wrote the book Nymphs, the 2-book volume, 1,700 pages called Trout. My introduction to fly fishing was through his hand. And then Chuck Fothergill, he was very famous in the Aspen Valley. He taught me how to tie flies when I was like 12. So now I'm in the Aspen Valley in the summer. I'm already skiing. But in the summer, fishing meant as much to me as skiing meant to me in the winter. So I got involved at that age, but when I got involved very heavily.
With fly fishing?
Yep.
Okay. And so your skiing career took off when?
I started skiing at Medicine Bow when I was around 7, briefly. But when I got into Aspen, now you have these big monster mountains. And I was in 4th grade, 8 years old, started skiing. But right away, skiing was not enough. I started skiing with the ski club, started racing locally. And when I was 12 years old, I won this race in Duluth, Minnesota, which was an age category for the top racers in the country. So when I won that race at 12, I was basically the best skier in the country at the age of 12. So I was invested at probably around when I was like 9 and 10, but I didn't know. I mean, it was just local stuff. But when I became 12, then my perspective got a little bit more broader.
Okay. And so when did you join the U.S. ski team?
I was named to the ski team when I was 16. It was called the Talent Squad. So the Talent Squad basically gave me a uniform, the U.S. ski team patch, and I'll never forget that. I got this box and I opened it up and took the plastic off the sweater, and here this U.S. ski team patch was. And it was like, wow, I mean, that's the first step of something really big in my life.
Mm-hmm.
You have, in anything that we do, you have this image and this dream of skiing in the Olympics, but you don't think about it on a daily basis. So it's the journey like we have, that we've seen in our fishing career. You catch a fish and you see this gold cup that people have spoken about.
That was the first time it got real,
so
that this might be.
In skiing, now when I'm 12, I won something pretty big, and now it became really, prevalent in my mind that the ski team stuff was close.
Mm-hmm.
And when I get to be 16, I won a bunch of races, and they named me to the team. So I was involved with the team at a fairly young age.
So did that competitive drive that you have, which, I mean, without exception, everyone that I've talked to about you has mentioned your drive to compete. Did that predate your being on the U.S. ski team, or did that sort of happen at the same time?
It's a process. I mean, you start winning at a young age, and so you're already connected.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it escalated because I was already really fired up about the whole thing.
Okay.
I mean, I was pretty passionate all along.
So,
playing baseball, fishing, whatever it was. I wanted to catch more fish. I wanted to, hit home runs, and I wanted to win ski races.
Right. So talk to me about the years in the spring of '72. You're on the U.S. ski team. So between then and 1980 is sort of the bulk of your skiing career. What was that like? I mean, you skied in some world championships. You skied in the Olympics twice, if I've got it right.
Right.
What was your experience like as a competitive skier?
I look back at it now that I understand excellence at a higher level, and really profound excellence through fishing. And I didn't see that until my last year as a ski racer. And when I look back at my ski career now, I'm almost embarrassed about it. In the fact that, yes, I was the national champion. I was the number one ranked downhill skier in the country for a number of years. Only 4 Americans can race in the Olympics. So that's a testament in itself, just a race in a world championship and in an Olympic event. And so from 74 to 1980, I was the top 4 American every year. And typically I was like the number 1 American, but compared to the big world of skiing, the international world and the Olympics, I was really nothing. I got 6th in the Olympics in 76. It was the best American finish at the time ever.
Is that when you broke your ankle and had to pack your...
Yeah. And that's a story all unto itself, but I didn't really, it was a lifestyle, but one of the most revealing things in that generation, the American team, we were really far behind the 8 ball when it came to sophistication and training. And I'll give you a prime example. I remember going to a race in Val d'Isère in 1973. Now I was on the team racing the World Cup. We get to Val d'Isère, and we'd been training all fall, and we get there, and I'm looking at a good friend of mine, Erwin Stricker from the Italian team. He's in a rubberized suit, a body condom, if you will. He had a helmet that had a fairing. His ski poles were wrapped around his body. He had a fairing between his knees and his ski boots. We're not racing in Val d'Isère.
Was that frustrating to you to realize that?
No, we're on Jupiter. We're racing against aliens.
Right.
It's like, what is this? And the porosity of a downhill suit that's got threads, that difference between a threaded downhill suit and a rubberized downhill suit is 2 seconds in that 2 minutes. Now I've got to give these guys a 2-second head start, and at 60 miles an hour at 88 feet per second, You're not going to catch those guys.
How did that feel for you, being competitive and wanting to win and realizing that other people just had better kit than you did and there was no way that you could compete against that? Did that drive you or did that frustrate you?
It's frustrated, yeah. Very much. And two, I think and look, I don't want to blame it on anybody other than myself, because I too could have made much better decisions on my equipment in that period of time, my boot selection, my ski selection. So besides the lack of sophistication, we were never in a wind tunnel to refine our aerodynamic tuck position until after the Olympics in 1980. So my body position aerodynamically, I was really poor.
Right.
So I was giving up so much time when I was in a tuck position sliding across the flats. I was always pretty good when the hill was really steep and icy, because aerodynamics didn't play much of a role. You had to be more of a technician, a better skier, and I was always pretty decent there.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, look, I look back into skiing 2 Olympics and 2 World Championships. Yeah, I'm proud of being there, but I'm not proud of the athlete I was at that time. I made some bad decisions. I needed somebody who was smarter than me to help be my mentor, to help me make assessments and judgments.
But in 1981, after you almost left the team.
I was almost kicked off. I was kicked off the team.
Right, and you sort of made your way back.
I did. I won in 1980 after the Olympics.
Right.
Billy Meroldt said, "Don't come back unless you come back after the last World Cup."
And you went to Austria to train with those guys. Is that right?
Yeah. Once I got back on the team, because after the Olympics in 1980, he said, if you don't come back from the last World Cup in Canada in the first seed, the top 15 in the world, don't come back.
And you did.
So I didn't. I missed a gate and was disqualified. But the last 2 races were not World Cup races. It was the national championships in Squaw Valley and a race the next day. And I knew my career was over, but I wanted to retire as national champion, which I won in 76, but in 1980, I got second in that first race. Mm-hmm. And that night, I was done. But the next day, I just skied out of my mind and won the race by over 3 seconds. And the point spread put me back in the top 15 in the world, and they couldn't kick me off the team.
Right.
So that next fall, now I had a new coach, an Austrian coach. I trained with the Austrian team.
And that's what you're sort of referring to when you said you didn't have a mentor. And you were sort of set up for this to be the second phase of your skiing career.
I had another chance.
And then what happened in 1981?
Well, in 1981, it's like, okay, I just made my way back onto the team, and I can't fuck this up. Excuse the profanity, but it was dire. And so I trained really hard. I changed equipment, got back to Rosenthal skis and Lang boots. I had a new Austrian coach that was really current.
So the stars were starting to align.
Yes.
Right.
It was really, I had rededicated myself. I had a great mentor. He taught me how to hip angulate, and it's a technical term in skiing. He took me to Europe. I trained with the Austrian team, and I was always finishing like 5th in the time trials against the team. And then Uli Spies, an Austrian kid, said, "Hey, skis, take a run on my skis." And then I started winning all the time trials, all the runs. Mm-hmm. And I went to Rosenthal. I said, you know what? I'm going to switch skis unless you can get me some better product. Long story short, my whole ski world was turned around overnight, and I rededicated myself, and all of a sudden I was skiing as well as anybody in the world.
And then?
I got hurt. I finished okay in the first race. I got 4th in Val Gardena, very difficult, really hard downhill. I got 4th there, and I knew I was going to win any day. And in Switzerland, the last race before Christmas, the ski fell off in a big compression, and I'd broken the course record 5 times in training that week. Every run I was the fastest. It was going to happen. And then I tweaked my knee, went home, had my arthroscopic surgery. I went back to Europe 2 weeks later. I skipped Kitzbühel because that's a steep, icy downhill. My knee was still tender. I skipped Garmisch. That was a hard downhill. And I went in to Wengen, Switzerland at the base of the Eiger. And there it's a higher elevated downhill, softer snow. And during the inspection, I looked at the last big jump into the finish, and it's always been dangerous there. Mm-hmm. A lot of people get hurt there. And in inspection, I noticed this jump is really big. But I hadn't raced yet since I had the operation. So I go back to the starting gate for the first training run, and I told the coaches it was my left knee. I'm going to go into the first right-hand corner as fast and as hard as I can, and I'm going to test that leg. and if it doesn't hurt, I'm going to carry on. And I went into that first corner as fast as I could, tipped it over, made a perfect turn, and then it was like game on. I'm back in the game, and I ripped that training run. It was like a race run. I was so happy. I was so full of life, and I was back. I'd never been on top in that league and in that element, and I knew I was skiing the best in the world at the time, and I couldn't wait for the weekend to win. And I carried so much speed into the last jump, and all of a sudden I got there. I thought, oh my God, I forgot this monster lip, and I got launched 150 feet through the air, landed on the flat. I caught an edge, and it pulled.
You overshot the jump.
Yeah, well, it just launched me, and it's a long, long landing, and then this flattens out
you
into
hit
the
on the
finish.
Flat spot.
And I landed on the flat, and I couldn't handle the compression. I caught an edge, and it pulled me into this fencing head first, and I broke my neck, my back, and my leg.
Do you remember much about that accident?
Yeah, I didn't get knocked out, but I remember, like, I'm stuck in this fence, and this guy, and I'm out of breath. I mean, it just knocked me, and and the spectators just like banging me on the back, trying to help me get air. And he's hit me right where my back is broke. I'm going, no, don't hit me again like this, And I broke my leg, and I tore all the ligaments in my knee. And I'm thinking as I'm laying there, I'm going, wow, I don't know if I can take that second run. This really hurt, And then I got up and I walked to the helicopter,
right.
And there was a clinic mid-mountain in Wengen. By the time I got there, I said I needed to go down to Interlaken, the main hospital. I said, there's something really wrong.
Did you know at that point that your skiing career was over?
Yeah.
How did you feel about that?
I
mean, that's got to be hard,
It was a shock. It didn't really hit me until later. It's like but the realization that there's a new life now. I stayed in the hospital in Switzerland for a week, and I remember they couldn't give me any medication until they had taken the X-rays. And laying there, I thought, I got this knife is stuck in my back, and it's just killing me. And I asked the doctor, I said, and I know there's a translation issue, I said, how long is this pain going to be? And he said, probably 6 to 8 months. I thought, oh God, just shoot me. But he was talking about recovery.
Yeah.
And then I went back to South Lake Tahoe, and Dr. Stedman was working there at the time. He operated on my leg, and I had it was a new life.
So what was that new life?
I was married to a woman that was, really a big issue. I had no money. I had no job. And it was like, okay, what am I going to do now for the rest of my life? And I knew I didn't have the mindset to work for anybody. And I thought the only way to make a good living is through exposure. And I'm no longer an athlete. So I thought of this, barter syndicated TV show where
Skiing with Andy Mill.
Yeah, Ski with Andy Mill was born. And I thought if I could own a 5-minute TV show and teach people how to ski, and newcomers how to walk up a staircase in ski boots, how to make the first turn, how to slide, how to stay warm, how to layer, how to ski the trees, how to carve a turn,
sure,
how to catch air. Then I thought, if I can do 20 ski tips and sell advertising inside that tip and give that tip to all these ski areas around the country. So now those TV stations in those small ski areas, they've got free programming.
Right.
And inside that TV little clip, that 5-minute clip, I'd give them a free 30-second commercial that they could sell. So now they had free programming, and they had something that they could sell. All they had to do was air my 5 minutes from start to finish. And then there, I sold an opening and closing billboard. I sold 2 30-second commercials. And now my value really was compounded, because as an athlete, they only know when you win is when you're on the podium. But now having a TV show, all these perfect demographics. These shows are being aired in ski areas. So now all my sponsors, Ray-Ban was paying me $35,000 a year. Fila was giving me $80,000 to wear their clothing. Marker Bindings, $25,000. The skis were $30,000. Now I'm making like $400,000 a year with a week of work, a week of editing, and it was, financially, I was in the game.
But it didn't totally satisfy your competitive drive, did it?
No.
Yeah.
No, and there too, the Olympics were upcoming, and I was working for Golden Gate Productions and some of the networks to cover World Cup skiing as an announcer.
Yeah.
And I did the Olympics for CBS in '92, which was Albertville, France, and then I did Lillehammer, Norway. And so for the next 20 years, I was in broadcasting.
Right.
So on the side, I was going to the Olympics and doing all these big events, and I'd ski with Andy Mill, and I was cashing out.
How often during that time, from your injury in 1981 to the early 90s, that you were doing skiing with Andy Mill, that television show, and then doing the broadcasting, the commentating, how often did you think about what could have been in your skiing career?
None. It was
Not at
over.
all. Okay.
But the only thing I knew was, after the fact, I knew that I had finally successfully figured out, I had broken the code.
Right.
And I challenged myself, and even though I didn't win, I had won in my heart, because I knew if I hadn't gotten hurt, I would have won.
Right. So in the 90s, you started fishing in the Keys. And I think you told me the first person you fished with down here was Bob Branham. Is that right?
Fished with Bob Branham. Yeah, I fished the first time I threw a saltwater fly rod was on the TV show Fly Fishing the World with John Barrett, and I saw a tarpon eat my fly for the first time.
On television.
On television.
Wow.
It's like, oh my God, I gotta do this again. This is like, this is.
So you came down to the Keys, and you started fishing, and you started fishing with Bob Branham, and you also spent some time with Harry Spear early on, and he was, correct me if I'm wrong, a bit of a mentor to you.
For sure.
And what was your experience like fishing with him in the early year, like sort of mid-90s, before you really tended towards competitive fishing?
I was still, I was back in the game, if you will. And it was not a game of tournaments, championships, wins and losses. I was back into the game of being connected to something that I really dug.
Yeah.
This was not trout fishing.
That wasn't limited by your injury at all.
No. I mean, this was, this was skiing the Hahnenkamm, where the average speed is 80 miles an hour. I'm back going 80 miles an hour with a fly rod in my hand, catching these big tarpons.
Sure.
So now I'm connected. I'm seeing something like, I'm connected to an animal, and I'm connected to a guy that knows the language, and he can bring me to that fish. I couldn't sleep. I mean, I was like in all the way right now.
Yeah. And so in talking to Harry Spear, something that he said about you was, and I have to look through my notes here, but he said basically when he first fished with you, on a scale of 1 to 10, you were an 8.5 out of 10. First time you were on his boat.
He was wrong.
Well, you could bring that up with Harry. But he also said something interesting. He said, if you showed him something, it was his. Which I
mean, if he showed me something,
yeah, if
got
you were
it.
to show Andy something that immediately when you saw it, you would not only understand it, but take ownership of it and be able to apply it yourself, not just how it was shown to you, but in other ways as well.
Right.
And I'm guessing that comes a lot from your athletic background and your ability to process, learn, like any athlete does. You learn how to do something and then you can sort of run with it yourself.
Right.
But when did you fish your first tournament with Harry? Was that the spring fly?
Yeah, we fished the spring fly. We'd fished about 7 years, I think, together before he invited me to fish the spring fly, and we fished that. We got second.
Mm-hmm.
We could have won. Siska caught like a 12.5-pound fish on like the last day, but I was just honored to be in the tournament. To get second was like, oh my God.
Sure. Did you start at that point to realize that being competitive in fly fishing, because a lot of people fly fish and they think it is fun. I mean, it's a way to decompress and enjoy the outdoors. But when did you start feeling the drive to compete with tournaments? Did that happen slowly, or was there a moment?
No, that was immediate.
Immediate.
Yeah, because I'd already been, Terry taught me so well about not only just catching fish, but I think that he too knew that together we could be a force.
Right.
And I think he was kind of grooming me to be his angler. And I got that. And it was not about going out and catching fish. It was going out and winning every day.
Right.
We were not just fishing. We were going out to win, whatever that meant. caught 2 or 3 fish, but you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
So now we get second in the spring fly, and then that same year we fished the fall fly, and we won that. And
You were all in.
I was all in.
And so at that time, and just to give the listeners an idea of what was happening with the Tarpon tournament specifically, because you won a permit tournament, you won bonefish tournaments, I think more than one.
Only one bonefish tournament.
One bonefish tournament.
Right.
But the bulk of your tournament success starting in 2000 was with Tarpon.
Right. And you know what, too, we did get second 3 times in the spring fly.
Right.
You know, that was one we never won, but, you know, was really the one that would have kind of, we were a bunch of Tarpon guys competing in a bonefish tournament.
Sure.
But yet we still had success there. But the real juice, the real drug was the Tarpon tournaments.
Tarpon. What is it about Tarpon fishing that spoke to you, do you think?
I think, you know, yes, you can feed bonefish, but you don't see their mouth. You can see real clear water, shallow water, smaller fish. But with the Tarpon, I felt like I could communicate better with that fish. It was almost like bugling elk that I know now. I didn't know back then. But I'm speaking to an animal through my voice. With the Tarpon and through chicken feathers, I could tell that fish what I wanted him to do. I felt like I could control that fish through feathers.
Yeah.
And the bite is that result of that, of communicating
There is a
well.
longer period of time when you're Tarpon fishing. When you throw a fly down, if you start at a stopwatch between when the fly lands and when the fish eats it, for Tarpon, that number of seconds would be much higher than for permit or for bonefish
Absolutely.
or almost anything else. So do you think that was part of what spoke to you about doing that communication that you're talking about? Is that duration of time that you had to really talk them into it?
That's the initial appeal. And I think that's probably my favorite aspect of Tarpon fishing is getting the bite, because when they open that mouth, then you know you have done something successful.
Yeah, it's a pretty like indelible confirmation.
It's a victory.
Yeah.
You know, then you have all the other aspects of Tarpon fishing that really have to be played out, learning how to fight fish effectively.
Yeah, and as an athlete, that's something that probably was appealing to you as well, that you actually had to fight this fish.
Right.
If you hook a permit, it just eventually is going to give up. But a Tarpon really requires that you best it.
You just stepped, the first foot was stepped into the ring. Now the war was now played out.
Yeah.
And like Tom Evans, he always thought I asked him, what do you think is the best aspect of Tarpon fishing? He liked pulling on them. You know.
But for you, it's the bite.
I like pulling on them. You know, initially I like the bite because that is victory in itself. But especially later, it was like, no, I'm taking that fly out of his face. No, I'm not going to break him off, or if he breaks off, I got him because the nail nut was in the top of the rod. No, I didn't catch that fish until I take that fly out.
So there's an interesting sort of moment here, and as someone who moved to the Keys and was paying attention to fishing in the magazines at that point, it was prior to social media, like there was a time when you were not just considered the best Tarpon fisherman, but on paper, you and Tim and Paul and Doug and the guys you were fishing with were so far ahead of everyone else. And it wasn't just the fact that you guys were throwing the toad, which was sort of a new arrival on the scene, but it was this whole system of how you were fishing. So just before we get into that, you fished one Gold Cup with Harry Spear. And how did you do in that? That was your first Tarpon tournament?
Yeah, it was.
And how was that?
I think we got third or fourth. I broke a fish off and that cost us maybe a second. But
right.
Azo won by a lot.
And then
I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
And the second year that you fished the Gold Cup was not with Harry, it was with Tim Hoover.
Right.
Who went on to become the guy that you fished in the Gold Cup for the next 6 years.
Correct.
And he was a protege of Harry Spears.
Exactly right.
And the first time you fished with him, because Harry had retired. And so, the footing is not exactly steady at the beginning of your tournament career in the Gold Cup. You're changing guides. And the first year you fish with Tim Hoover, you guys lose by half a pound. Is that right?
Right.
And tell me about how that felt.
It was devastating. I mean, we should have won.
Right.
We caught a big old fish that was probably well over 100 pounds. Timmy gaffed it, slid it up to slide it into the boat, and he stopped briefly up against the gunnel. The fish shook its head, the fly fell out, and then Timmy dropped the fish and he swam off with our gaff.
Right. And his
And
glove, according to him.
it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, what? Well, no, come back. So we get 200 points for a release, but 1,000 points swim away, and we lose by 5. We lose by 8 ounces, and this is the biggest tarpon tournament in the world.
Did that light a fire? That was, I mean, what I
I was pissed.
Yeah,
I was going like, we had it. I did not sleep. I did not. I stopped sleeping for the next 10 years.
Yeah,
but I knew we were in the game, and that was obvious. That we had already done. We got in second. I really felt we should have won, and we should have won. We just had, stuff happens when you're out there. But my desire to win was insatiable, and I know it was for Timmy too. So we were the perfect team for that next number of years.
Yeah, because in my conversations with Tim Hoover, he arrived at a similar place to you from a different angle.
Sure.
But what I see is two people that sort of arrived at this moment where, according to him, his main problem was he wasn't worried about anyone else. He was only concerned about himself. And one of the things I talked to Chrissy, your ex-wife, about, what was it like watching you compete during that time? And she said that one of the only things you ever talked about was the fish. And fishing these tournaments, all the competitors always talk about everyone else. They always complain about other people on the boats, or other teams on the water. And I found it interesting because that sort of idea of staying present and only focused on what you can control, it seems like partially by accident and partially by nature, you and Tim Hoover arrived at this time together in the Gold Cup. And then Paul Tejera, the guy that you were fishing with in the Golden Fly, I had a long conversation with him earlier, and he basically said the same thing, that his, through different means, that his goal in those tournaments was to win, but there was a presence about what he was doing himself. So starting in 2000, you started to win, and not just a few tournaments. You started to basically run all the tarpon tournaments except the Holly, which you didn't fish very often. You did win it with Paul.
Right.
And that period of time, and I do feel a need to sort of reiterate to the people listening to this, that was unheard of. And not just because other people hadn't won in the past. You had Azo, who had won 3 years in a row, and before that it was Glenn Flutie and Tim Mahaffey, right?
Well, Tim Mahaffey had won one gold cup, but he was winning more bonefish tournaments.
I gotcha.
So tarpon tournaments, it was really Azo. Flutie won 5 in a row. And Billy Pate had won 4.
The Golden Fly was a new tournament about that time, right? Because there had been some infighting in the Gold Cup. Some guys were upset that they weren't fishing on 20 pound, and they were upset with the tournament for whatever reason, which is not atypical in these events for people to be frustrated. And so you have a bit of a fractured community. You have some people fishing the Golden Fly, some people fishing the Gold Cup, and then you guys come in and basically run the block for 6 years. I mean, the list of questions I have about that period of time is endless, but what was it that you recall from that time?
I just wanted to win everything.
Why?
Winning breeds winning.
But why is that important to you?
I think it was really important not only because winning breeds winning and winning feels so good, but I think it was a chance to have redemption from my lack of winning in my ski career. Even though my last year as a skier I did well and I'd gotten over the hump and I got hurt and it was gone and I was okay with that. But now I was winning and they were giving me the trophy. Like this is affirmation that you're the best. And so it gave me a second chance to do something really well. When I left my ski career, I was a broadcaster for 20 years. Ski with Andy Mill made me money. Working with the networks gave me exposure. But I didn't want to talk about the guys that were doing what they were doing.
You wanted to do it.
I missed being in the arena. I wanted to be throwing the punches. I wanted to be, standing over the victim, with the mat splattered with blood.
Right.
And obviously I'm kind of, expounding on that in kind of a weird way, but
Well,
in the
it is
Tarpon
important to
tournaments, I
clarify.
wanted to destroy everybody. And when we walked into the opening ceremonies and the banquets, I knew I was going to win.
Right.
I knew we were going to win. And I didn't want to win just by a little bit. I wanted to just destroy everything around me.
Yeah. Tim Hoover said a great thing about you. He said that in your ski career, people were scared of you because you would die to win.
People in my ski career knew I would die to win, but they weren't afraid of me winning because I didn't have all.
No, he said they were afraid of you.
Oh, in the fishing tournaments?
No, your skiing career.
Who said that?
Tim Hoover said that some of the competitors were not frightened of you hurting them, but they were frightened that they knew that you would do anything without limit to try to win, including dying.
Yeah, and I almost did.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had over 20 operations, 13 knee operations, replaced knee, my back's been fused, So, yeah, you know what? I had the energy that you need and the focus that you need. I just didn't have the intellect I needed as a skier. But when I became a tarpon fisherman with Harry and Timmy, I had everything available, to win, including all the practice days to refine mistakes. I don't think we had a weak link. And I've always assessed, how good are you? Well, what's your weakest link? And a backhand cast into win, forehand cast, underhand cast, however you want to play out all the idiosyncrasies and the dynamics of doing something well. I felt like I had mastered all the pieces of the puzzle, and I was afraid of no one.
Yeah. When Chrissy said that, when I talked to her, she said, I asked her what she remembered about that time when you were fishing, and she doesn't fish herself. But she said that what she remembers is that her sensation was that you were trying to master it, that it wasn't about competition. It was more about trying to achieve a mastery
Absolutely.
of this thing. Yeah.
Well, it's like speaking to your wife. You get focused and everything else goes away. I mean, yes, I was a father, a very diligent, loving father. I was all in. Hopefully, Nikki can assess that. And I think Chrissy too would admit that. But when I was away from the family, it was all about perfecting this new chance at winning something that meant so much to me.
If your skiing career hadn't been cut short, do you think that competitive drive is so natural to you that you would have been this competitive and this successful in tarpon fishing? Or do you think it gave you some fuel
to burn? It gave me a lot of fuel to burn. And I think getting hurt that last year and skiing with the Austrians and having that mentor, it really taught me about commitment and being you can care, you can want as much as you want, but if you don't do the work, you're not going to win. Like you mentioned earlier, you can have the best fly rod and the reel and the fastest boat and the best guide, but once he gets you into the arena, if you can't punch that fish out and bring him into the boat, you're not going to win.
Yeah. And
it takes a lot of personal focus on doing those things well. It takes a long time. And yeah, I mean, I tied knots and flies and broke stuff. I had Chrissy hanging onto a scale for hours. How much am I pulling? How much am I pulling? But yeah, I was really driven, and I think that last year in the skiing helped me understand how to win,
and be willing to do the work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That last year was really important.
So during that time, you were fishing the Gold Cup with Tim Hoover, and you were fishing the Golden Fly with Paul Tejera, and you were fishing the Holly with Doug for a period of time, Doug Kilpatrick, right. And then you won 4 Golden Flies with Paul Tejera, and then at some point he and Doug switched.
Right.
And Doug started fishing the Golden Fly with you, and you won with him, and you started fishing the Holly with Paul, and you won that as well. And during that time, you were still fishing the Gold Cup with Tim Hoover.
Right.
What was the experience like of fishing with those different guides? Because each team has its own dynamic. I mean, how were you able to move back and forth between those guides?
It was very easy because they were really good guides. They knew where the fish were, and I knew how to catch them.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I mean, they knew that my track record had already been proven, and they had proven themselves. Paul Tahara had won the Gold Cup with Flutie. Doug had won a bunch of stuff. He hadn't won a tarpon tournament yet, but I had fished a lot with Doug, practice days and having fun, and I knew he knew where to find fish, and we caught a lot of fish together. So it's like, okay, I got a new captain to win with. It was easy, and not only that, I love these guys. You know, they're like a family member to me.
They all said the same thing about fishing with you. I mean, the main point of agreement is that they love you and that their friendship with you is something they value more than the fishing. But they all said something else that was really interesting, which was they all felt pressure fishing with you because of how good you were. Were you aware of that pressure that you carried around?
Not with Paul, but Doug. I remember the first day running into the Lower Keys, he said, God, I'm so nervous. And I said, why are you so nervous? He said, I'm fishing with you. And I said, dude, we got this. Let's just go fishing. Show me the fish, and we're going to get them, and we're going to win. Just show me the fish. But still, he hadn't won yet, and I understand now. I mean, I felt that with Rob when I won with him later. It's like when you're supposed to win, it puts a different kind of pressure on you. Well, and I understand that.
Tim Hoover had a great way of putting it. I had a long conversation with him, and he said his effect was contagious. He brought me faster towards winning. He accelerated the process, and I wanted to perform for him. Is that something that you did naturally? Or, I mean, because you're an incredibly affable person. You love other people, but you're also very fixated on fishing well. And there's a certain, there's two things going on there. In one way, you're very self-centered about the task at hand. But most people consider a self-centered person to be an asshole. And no one thinks that of you. Everyone says you're incredibly focused, and especially the people that I've talked to during your tournament career, they talk about how fixated you were on what you were doing, but they all also say how great you were to fish with and what a nice guy you were and how much they value their personal relationships. Was that natural, or did you work on that?
No, I've always felt like I love people more than I love the outcome of what we do together. You know, I always felt that was more important. I would never yell at anybody, and if we had to fix things, we figured out how to fix them. But more importantly than winning was maintaining that great friendship that I had with everybody. But I think in Timmy's statement and what he said is that he saw, I know that he wanted to win, but I don't think he realized how much real passion and desire to win was until we started fishing together. And I think that's what he means by that, because I was insanely driven, and I think that is contagious. There's a lot of osmosis that plays a role when you're with somebody like that too can win but hasn't won yet.
Yeah. Tim also said that you had an insatiable desire, the both of you, that we each had an insatiable desire that was identical.
Yep. That makes a perfect team.
Yeah.
It really does.
And what was it like? I mean, those tournaments back then, the Golden Fly was on 20 pound tippet. The Gold Cup was on 16. Did you have any trouble going back and forth between those tournaments?
No, I just fished the 20 like it was 16.
Right.
There's no need to try to pull harder. I mean, we were already catching our fish really fast.
Sure. And what is it about fighting fish that you think, like, what were some of the things that you were doing at that time that you feel had the effect of catching them faster?
Just pulling your ass off. You know, I definitely pulled on scales. I understood what it took to break 16-pound test tippet, which is really important. And I broke a lot of fish off on practice days, not on purpose, but I'd go to maximum and I'd fight them so aggressively. If I could catch a 100-pound fish in 15 minutes, I'd try to catch them in 9. You know, so then you find out how much, you know, your tackle is capable. You know, what's the ability of your tackle, and then you would go over the edge, and then in the tournament you just back off that 10%. So you wouldn't break anything off, but you knew how fast or how hard you could pull. And also too, in doing that, you learn how to fight fish, the angles, the head. You pull this way, you pull that way, you lift. And we were deadly. We really refined catching big fish quickly.
Yeah. what was, when you were competing essentially every year, I mean, you were multiple times every year that time, did that change your daily fishing in that period of time?
When I fished every day like it was a tournament. We'd fish a bit longer. We'd fish as soon as you could see until you couldn't see at night.
Right.
And I still fish that way with Nikki, and every fish is approached like this is the last fish I'll ever cast to. I mean, with that kind of intensity.
So were there, when I watch people do something and they're very good at it, it looks to me like they're operating very far within their abilities. In that period of time, were there any instances where you felt like your abilities were being tested, that you were more at the outside or even fishing beyond your abilities?
No.
You felt like everything was within what you knew how to do?
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
Because we won. We caught them.
Right.
If I felt like I was making, mistakes under pressure, bad casts, breaking fish off, then I'd be outside of the confines of my comfort zone.
Right.
But my comfort zone, I think, was out there to the point that I could really push myself hard, and it was containable.
Right. So you never felt like you were pushing yourself beyond.
I was trying.
Yeah.
I was always trying to push as hard as I could, but how hard can you push? How hard can you pull on a fish?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
I mean, that, look, when Rick Bannister broke the 4-minute mile mark, there were another 10 guys that broke the 4-minute mile in the next year. There are a lot of people in this world that taught others how to do things well, that raised the bar. And Al Pfluger once said recently about, certain people, or like Flip Pallett said something about Al Pfluger. When Al Pfluger would do something, Flip said, "You can fucking do that?" So there's always somebody doing something, catching, hooking 15 and catching 14. The numbers game. Now all of a sudden you're realizing instead of jumping 5 in a day and catching 2, that was big in a certain period of time. Now we could hook 15 and catch 13 or whatever those numbers were on any given day. Mm-hmm. So I know people were going, "Oh my God, these guys they're doing that." And we were those guys doing that.
Yeah. I mean, but knowing where that limit is the hard part. For a lot of people, that's difficult. I mean, you see it all the time with anglers. They cast too early or they pull too hard, but just the intellectual understanding of where those lines are and that you're able to maintain that for that duration of time. I mean, to me, it's very impressive, and I'm sure to a lot of other people.
Thank you. I don't know if we could have gotten a whole lot better. Timmy was really good. We caught a lot of fish. Yeah, you can't catch every fish that comes by your boat. You think you can when you're making that cast. We were breaking hooks. We were really testing tackle. We didn't, but tackle, the rods were great. The reels were great. We caught a lot of fish. We won a lot of tournaments, but we always tried harder. You'd always try to make that cast a little bit harder or further into a certain wind. But the thing is what's really important is understanding what's realistic. So you wait for your shot.
Right.
I know I can't make that shot. I know I can't throw it 120 feet. And what's really important too, yes, I can throw 90 feet, but if I hook that fish at 90 feet, there's so much stress or stretch, I'm going to hook him, but he's going to fall off the hook when he jumps. So now it's understanding the dynamics of how to catch a fish when you want to catch that fish. Where is that shot? Harry used to say, wait for your shot. I could see the fish. I could make the shot at 70 and 90 feet. He said, wait till there's 60. Slide it in there. Now you're not going to miss. Your cast is going to be accurate. When he bites it, you're going to set the hook. The hook's going to go right to the bend, and you're going to catch that fish. He used to say, one cast, one fish. So most people cast too early. They got to cast again. The angles change. The fish feels the fly line, and you don't get the bite.
Right.
That's what he taught me. So there's a limitation to everything, and there's a barrier about pushing the limit. But then it becomes realistic about how far is that limit. Now you fish inside the confines of what that limit is. And that's what I think makes a really good guide and angler.
Interesting. Did you, sorry, I have a question here written down. When you hook a fish, what is it that goes through your mind when in that moment, you've built up to this moment and you hook a fish? What are you thinking about in that time?
Nothing.
Nothing.
I know what to do.
Right.
There's no conscious thought. It's like skiing at 80 miles an hour and I go rolling into a corner. I know what to do.
Sure.
I'm not gonna say, okay, I got to tip my ski, I got to lean in, I got to counter the centrifugal forces. I know what to do.
Those
do it so
are
much.
intuitively.
The fish bites the fly. I get the slack out, get the rod up against my waist, hang on with my stripping hand,
Right.
and I just seat that hook and hold the fish. And he shakes his head. He seats that hook. I clear my line, and away we go. There is no conscious thought. You just react.
Sure. This period of dominance in the tournaments came to an end in 2006. What was that like? What factored into that for you?
It was an avalanche of a lot of stuff. Life got in the way.
Mm-hmm.
I lost my guide. Timmy went on, and right then, Chrissy decided not to be married any longer, and that was really hard.
And in our conversations about that happened during the Gold Cup.
Yeah. Anyway, no, it's all good now.
Yeah,
It's all good.
it is. It's very good, and it was good then, and it was difficult, but
like you said in our podcast, addiction just happens.
Sure.
Life crashes.
But you kept going.
Happens.
You kept going through it.
Yeah, but I got, it was no longer the same. My life was no longer the same. I lost my guide. My family, sure, I still have my family, but I lost my wife. I lost my kids. I lost my dog. I lost my house. I lost one of my best friends. And it's like, by fishing, who cares about fishing? I'd go fishing, and Doug Kilpatrick, when he was going through an issue, he said, I just want to be on the water. I couldn't be anywhere. I'd get on the water and I'd just start crying. I said, I got to go home.
Right.
So there was this abyss for about 3 years that really was hard. But, and towards the end of my fishing career, I fished with Del Prez for 2 years, and my life was just upside down. It was just, I'd fallen off a cliff.
But it was interesting. All the people that I talked to who had this great tournament run with you, they all stuck by you during that time, and were your closest friends.
Absolutely,
some of your biggest supporters in that time.
Absolutely. I mean, Doug Kilpatrick called me every week. Tahira would call.
Tim.
That's who we are. We are a family.
Sure.
If I look around down here and I see all the guides and all the anglers, I might not have, spent a whole lot of time with everybody, but I know that if Simon Becker were to call me, I've never fished with him. He knows I'd be there.
Yeah.
And that's what fishing and tournaments do. Fishing in general won't do what tournaments do. Fishing in general, everybody and all the players, and everybody's out there fishing. We have the same passion. But when you get in a tournament, then you become brothers, if you will. Sure, you're competing against each other, but you come back to the same dock. You leave from the same dock, and now there's a synergy, and everybody understands that synergy in your.
Well, some of the people that that I fished against in these tournaments that you have these battles against, especially if you're pitted against one another. There's a closeness that happens that you can't find any other way.
Right.
Even though it doesn't make sense. You think, well, you're competing against someone.
Right.
But it just sort of bonds you in a way that you're talking about.
Yeah, go to the NFL Hall of Fame induction ceremony.
Were you surprised at that, like the level of those personal relationships in this sport? When they mattered most?
I wasn't even thinking about it. Look, I was a ship at sea with, taking on water. I was sinking. I had no chance of recovery. And I had no way out. I remember going to my therapist the first time and crying, nonstop. And I asked her, it's like, when I broke my back, in Switzerland, how long is this going to take? He said 6 months. I said, kill me. And I asked the therapist, how long is this pain going gonna subside? When will it subside? And she said, maybe 2 or 3 years. I said, are you serious? And she said, maybe longer. And it was. I mean, people would ask me 3 years later, how you doing? I'd just start crying. Like now. It's been 16 years.
Sure.
But pain is real. Pain hurts.
But how did you, because you're past that now.
Yeah, but I still cry.
Sure. But that's your life is, as one of your friends, you have a great relationship with your family. You have you have people in your life that care about you.
My ex-wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, she had incredibly nice things. She said the first time she played tennis against you, your serve was better than hers, and you'd never played tennis before.
Well, that's not saying a whole lot.
Wow. But so how did you make it? I mean,
how did I make it good?
Yeah.
I woke up one day and I said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know, I read a really good book called When Things Fall Apart,
right?
Which I gave to Doug Kilpatrick, which helped him. And I just, you know, I was just tired. And, you know, at some point life goes on.
Yeah.
You know, there's a new chapter. You turn the page, you wake up and you say, you know what, fuck it.
And
I'm going to go that way.
What a life it is, because you came back to the tournaments in 2015, fishing with Rob Fordyce. And I mean, from the perspective of someone that was fishing in that tournament and sort of hearing the chatter about it, everyone was looking at you.
To see how I do?
Of course, yeah. Well, not to see how you do necessarily. I mean, that's part of it in a tournament, of course.
Right, sure.
But you hadn't fished a tournament for close to 10 years at that point.
Quite a while, yeah.
And you sort of came back and you won on the final day.
And
not only did you win, but you won with the cameras rolling on that Silver Kings television show.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
It was interesting, you know, trying to win a tournament with a camera right next to you, and the fact that, you know, on a fun day of fishing, you can talk about what you're doing, what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, so the audience can understand and get a little bit more involved. But I kept thinking to myself, don't get fancy here and try to show off and break this fish off. You know, so I was really trying to stay focused, and it was really difficult because they were there.
Right.
And fishing with Rob, I mean, I gotta tell you, that was really generous of him to ask me after all these years to fish that tournament. You know, I'd been out of the game. Right. But we'd always spoken about, you know, fishing together and versus fishing against each other, because we were, you know, he and Carlos and Timmy and I, we were always kind of doing battle. And I said, yeah, you know what, let's give it a go. My son was fishing in the tournament. Rob asked me, you know, one of the great tarpon guides of all time. Sure. I said, yeah, let's go. Let's try it. Yeah.
Did you, was it vindicating in some way for you to come back and win that tournament?
No.
No.
I didn't need any vindication.
Right.
But I'll tell you, you were there.
Yeah.
You know, at the awards presentation, I was crying like a baby, because it was a realization that I was never going to be in that position again. I was never going to be. There's only your window of winning only lasts so long, and then the torch is passed, if you will,
right?
Or your time is expired.
I think that's kind of what I mean about it being vindicating. I mean, not that you need to prove how good you are, but was it especially meaningful, maybe for the reasons you described? Yeah.
It was hugely rewarding, because it was a confirmation that I could still do it after, you know, I was out of the game for a long time. With
the fishery changing and the tactics changing.
You know, tarpon fishing, when you do it so long and so well, I don't think the game has changed that much. The only thing that's changed are my eyes, maybe a little bit. You know, understanding the distance between where that fly landed and where the feed begins. Sure. But I think if you got good fishing, I think I can still fish really well. Yeah. But why I was crying so heavily in that awards presentation is I realized that instead of getting out of a game and finishing 10th and 11th and 12th and finally you retire, I had won, and I was basically saying goodbye. Right. And knowing that I was never going to be able to win again at that level.
Wow. So talk to me about your life now. How does fishing fit into your life now? Because it's a big change, and people, I see it all the time with anglers that get really heavy into the tournament game, and it consumes them, which it always does. And then they have a hard time, you know, unclipping from that and continuing to fish for fun.
Right.
But you seem to have a great relationship with fishing now, and you fish with Nikki, and that's a big part of what fishing is to you now.
Right. It's so great. I mean, to tell you the truth, throughout life, obviously it's a big book with many chapters, and some chapters are kind of ugly, as you know as well as anybody, and you get through those, and the next chapter might be as great as it's ever been. And now my life is as perfect as it's ever been. And it's really hard to compare one stage to the other, because comparing apples to oranges, they're both great. But my comfort zone inside my skin is as great as it's ever been. I know who I am, what I stand for. I know who my family members are. And I know, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've got a great woman in my life, and fishing is as perfect for me as it's ever been, because I'm not insatiably trying to chase something that I can't catch or haven't caught yet, like a trophy, like a gold cup. My relationship with my son, it's as perfect as I could. Here we go again. But, a lot of parents will say my son is my best friend.
Yeah.
But are they really? So like with Nikki and I, we do this podcast. We fish for 6 weeks in the spring. We all hunt in the fall. I've got my pal, but fishing for me is just so perfect in that we just go fishing, and he's so damn good.
Yeah.
He's refined, all of his weak links and the idiosyncrasies to do well. And
would you consider your relationship with him to be your greatest success?
Oh, absolutely, without question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've said that before.
Sure. Is there anything looking back on your competitive fishing career that you wish was different?
No, maybe I wish I could have won the spring fly once. I've had the most perfect life in so many ways. I really have. And I think that, fishing and tournament fishing and doing what I did in the tarpon world, I think I feel better about, what I've done in fishing as a whole, in that I had a fishing show for 7 years. We did 81 shows around the world. My relationship with all my friends in fishing, all the guides I fish with around the world, the book I wrote, A Passion for Tarpon, and now this podcast. And this podcast, I think, in the long run is going to be very meaningful, because we are collecting history. And fishing stories that are going to pass are going to go away.
Yeah.
And I want to hear the stories from all the icons and all the Hall of Famers out there. And so if you take a look at what I've done in the world of fishing, is quite plethoric.
Yeah.
And kind of a good spectrum. It's not one dimensional.
Yeah. I had one of the great opportunities that I've had in general is the opportunity to call so many different people, preparing for this interview and figuring out the timeline of your story fishing down here, and talking to people that knew you. And like any friend, I always have a great interest in my friends. And it's sort of a weird thing to call people and talk to them. And I was thinking about when I talked to all of these people who all reported such great things about you, not just as a fisherman, but as a human being. And one of the people that I talked to was Tim Hoover. And we had a really long, sort of great conversation about his story moving into the tournaments and just how meaningful that time was for him. And he said something, and I think it's a good thing to close with. And I really love the way that he said it. And this was in the context of us talking about the Gold Cup. And we'd been talking about tarpon fishing for, probably an hour and a half at this point. And he said, "I'm more grateful to Andy for what he did for my life than anything he ever did for me in the Gold Cup." And I think that's an incredibly generous thing to say. And he really meant it, and that the one thing I can tell you is that's the best way that I've heard it put, but that was put in different ways from every person that I talked to in the process of preparing for this. So I know that you're proud of your tournament success, and you have every reason to be. But for me, as your friend, that's the thing that sticks with me the most after talking to all these people. So thank you very much for sitting down and doing this.
I'm so embarrassed.
You shouldn't be. You shouldn't be.
Well, thank you, Nathaniel. And
absolutely.
The deal was that I'd do this with you after you won the Gold Cup.
Right.
So now you're in debt.
So we know you're a cheater and you broke the rules.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah. I'm really, really honored to call you and Nikki both really close friends. And, this started out as a joke, like, oh, I should interview Andy. And then the more that I think we talked about it, the more interested I became in it.
Yeah.
And it's been a really, enlightening experience to talk to people and to talk to you and hear your perspective on this stuff. And I know this is your podcast, and I know that the purpose of the podcast is for you guys to collect stories that might not be told. Because a lot of the people that operate in this game are not on social media and they have these great stories. There is no question in my mind that you fulfill all of that criteria as far as someone whose story needs to be told. And I'm really deeply honored that you allowed me to be a part of this and to ask you these questions. And yeah, thank you so much for sitting down with me and being in the hot seat for a while.
Switching seats. Well, Nathaniel, you're a great pal. And I would not have allowed just anybody to interview me. And I feel kind of embarrassed that I'm being interviewed on my own podcast.
I don't think you should at all. I mean, like I said, it's the number one thing that I hear from people. So,
well, thank you very much. And, and Nikki and I both hold you in such high esteem as not only an angler, but as a friend as well.
Well, thank you. And I hope you've done a lot of thinking about what your hot tip is going to be, because we're going to shoot that next. So everyone listening at home, get ready for Andy's hot tip. It's not actually hot in terms of temperature. It's just hot, metaphysically.
Learn how to not to cry on camera. I don't know how to do that. But anyway,
Andy, I love you, buddy. Thank you so much.
You know that.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
When I saw his West Side Story.